Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. Now, I'll resist drawing comparisons about industrial cybersecurity to butterflies and bees, but producing this episode did remind me of another great Muhammad Ali quote. "The hands can't hit what the eyes can't see," is what the greatest of all time said. Now, this could provide an easy segue into the ongoing challenges about asset visibility, but really, I think it goes deeper than that. In addition to being able to see all the things we need to defend against, we also have to understand what to look for in establishing those defenses. In Ali's terms, we need to see where the opponent is most likely to target those punches and what kinds of hooks and jabs could be coming our way. In non-boxing terms, we need to do a better job of QAing our operational landscape to find any current or potential defects in our security. This is obviously tough for a number of reasons. There's costs involved, there might be some downtime to combat, and perhaps most difficult, we have to face our own weaknesses and put aside the finger pointing or anxiety that accompanies finally seeing all those things that have been or could have been hitting us for quite a while. Here to discuss those challenges and solutions is Bryson Bort. He's the founder and CEO of SCYTHE, a leading provider of adversarial exposure validation solutions. So hey Bryson, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us today on Security Breach.
I'm glad to be here, Jeff.
Excellent. So jumping right into it a little bit, we had a chance to meet out at RSA and talk about some of the things that you're up to. But one of the things I was hoping to get your perspective on is just some of the changes that we've seen over maybe the last even 5 years or so. There's been a lot of differences in the way that the hackers are coming at the industrial control system. What are some of the things that you're seeing maybe have been the biggest changes or the biggest differences in the way some of these attacks are being targeted or carried out?
Sure. Let's give a little history to this. So I think where folks first start to have industrial control system attacks come to the consciousness is Stuxnet, right? It has now been 0 days since Stuxnet has been mentioned. And what was interesting about that is that was a purpose-built weapon, right? And I hate that we talk about military grade and we talk about cyber weapons, and I think they get thrown around way too often. Anytime anyone tells you that they're getting 1 billion attacks a day, that you're not, right? That's not the case. But what's prominent about that is that's the first time that this comes really to the collective consciousness. And we expected that to be the new norm. There were going to be more of these purpose-built weapons that were going to be used by military and intelligence organizations in the pursuit of their national military and intelligence goals against civilian critical infrastructure. And I want to emphasize that, right? Most of this is civilian critical infrastructure. It affects the general populace. Stuxnet was not. Stuxnet was a targeted military operation against uranium enrichment at Natanz. But it's interesting to note that that's the start, and that's not what we've seen. And that was validated recently by several experts in the industrial control system space who came and testified to U.S. Congress and were like, hey, what happened since Stuxnet? And by the way, it wasn't more Stuxnet. And we've seen smaller examples. And I think that's important because when we're talking about this space and its impact on society, it comes to, well, what can we do about it? And if we are focused on threats that are not the threats that we have to worry about, we're focused in the wrong space. We do not have unlimited attention, resources, time, money, tooling to do all of these things. So we need to get it right. And what's right and what has been the most common approach is still your IT into the operational technology space is the most common access vector. And I don't think that's surprising when you think about it, because IT's entire job is to put your organization connected to the internet and use that for business functions. And wink, wink, not business functions, because folks like to shop on Amazon during work time, right? I'm not judging, but it's true, right? This is what happens. And so those same compromises read about, they land, they recognize they're at an OT asset owner, they pivot through the network, they cross over to the threshold, and we wrote a blog post about this with Megan Sanford, and they take over what we call the beachhead, the high-level industrial control systems and computers that control everything else. And all the hard work I took to get into OT, easy. Those systems are 3 generations old, Windows and Linux. I'm done. They already know everything. They talk to everything. They have authentication. If there is authentication, they talk the unique protocols. I'm done. I just tell it what to do and I'm good to go. That works for the most part. The recent change that we've seen in the last year or two has been the rise of hacktivism. And I felt like this is something we were worried a lot about in the aughts with all of the global counterterrorism issues. And certainly those terrorist organizations looked at cyber operations as a way to support their terrorist goals. And we're seeing that now tied more explicitly again to the military and intelligence organizations that are supporting, sanctioning, and giving them target data. And so there's been a large increase in, for example, like Russian hacktivism attacking U.S. I'm just recently thinking of the news with Canada, but also in the U.S. Oil and natural gas, water. And what they're doing is, first of all, they're trying to undermine trust. Our society depends on the fact that you trust that you will have electricity. That's what makes us a modern society. You trust that your water will be there and will be clean. All of these things are organic to what modern society rests on, and we take them for granted. Well, that's what they're trying to undermine. They're trying to say, hey, you can't trust that. That doesn't work the way you think it does. And that's their primary goal, is to foment that fear and uncertainty, doubt directly in the mind of the populace.
Absolutely. No, it's interesting. And I think surprisingly enough, one of the biggest issues we still fight in the industrial sector is folks thinking they're not a target. Nobody's interested in what I'm doing. Nobody's going to be looking at my network, my assets, my data. We know that's not the case. Looking back again, historically a little bit, when do you think that hacktivist community or just the hackers in general started saying, hey, you know what? These industrial control systems, there's a lot to be done here, either in terms of disruption and chaos or just money and ransom. Do you think what made the light bulb go on, I guess, for a lot of these people?
First of all, I like to joke, nobody ever gets accidentally hacked. There's no way that some organization, some software is like, oh, we just walked into your enterprise. I mean, 99% of the time that's true. Because I always feel whenever I make a 100% comment like that, I can just feel some nerd out there going like, oh, actually, there's this one possibility. And yeah, there are use cases, right? But most of the time, you're not getting accidentally hacked. So let's go back to what's the definition of cyber risk? And to answer your question directly, Jeff, it starts with motive, to my joke, right? You aren't accidentally hacked. Somebody has to want to do something for some reason. I have to, right? It's intentional. It's human operator-led threats. So I have to want to do something. Well, wanting to do something and being angry at the United States doesn't get you very far, right? I mean, maybe you drink a fifth of vodka in Moscow and you throw it in the direction of the West and you're like, I'll teach you. Well, it doesn't really do a whole lot. But what does is capability. And that's where I have the tooling, the infrastructure, the tradecraft, the target packages, all of the components of the attack supply chain that I need to effectively realize my motive. That's the threat part. And I like this model because it also highlights the defender's part, which is none of those things have done anything to you yet. It's opportunity, surface area. What do you have that I can do something to? Turns out cyber attacks only work on your computers. I can't do a cyber attack on nothing. I have to do it on your computers that work your way, that talk the way that you do with your users. That's the part that we as defenders control. And I bring that up in the operational technology context because we talked about the IT piece and that exposure into OT. The other then is the direct OT access, and that's hygiene. You should have proper hygiene to make sure that you do not have a HMI for a water utility, which, by the way, you are going to have those. They have to be internet connected because I need to be able to do remote access. So we're not taking away remote access, but we do need to ensure that remote access is controlled. Multi-factor authentication gets thrown around a lot. I mean, that does work, but it's not as easy to do as everyone might think. So making sure I've hardened the access where there is and making sure there isn't direct access where there shouldn't be. That's what we can control. And that's what then restricts us to where there is the opportunity for that threat to realize that motive against you. So what changed was ransomware. Chris Krebs, when he was the director of CISA, and I was the senior advisor on critical infrastructure to the agency at the time back in 2020, we gave a talk at RSA. We talked about the coming scourge of ransomware as a national security threat. And this stuff is a national security threat. Those great defenses of those two oceans the United States has enjoyed for decades is gone because of the interconnectivity that cyber operations allow. And so ransomware in the last 5 years has been the great sea change. And again, going back to, I thought you said military and intelligence organizations, Bryson. Yes, that organized crime, those ransomware gangs are supported, sanctioned, given targets, given tools, given details by military and intelligence organizations that are collaborating with them to conduct these things. And it's beautiful because, and I mean that sarcastically, it's sarcastically beautiful. It's because I'm not advocating for this. I'm against these folks. Take them out. Right. But what's beautiful about that ecosystem is it funds itself, right? Crime is motivated by money. And guess what? Ransomware generates money, which generates the interest and subsidizes the military and intelligence operations that our adversaries are using against us on critical infrastructure. So ransomware was the great change because every company, whether you are mom and pop, one computer cookie shop to all the way with some of the largest companies in the world, you all have the same vulnerability and the same opportunity from attacker perspective to generate cash.
Yeah, absolutely. When we look at the industrial sector too, a lot of the things that you've mentioned are sort of at the top of the list in terms of priorities. But then when you start building all these priorities, it can be frustrating in terms of where to start. So when you look at some of the things that the industrial sector is still lagging on, whether it's the legacy equipment, credentialing, remote access, is there a place that you would advocate for starting? Like, this is what you got to really start with in understanding your threat landscape and really the battlefield that you're now working on.
Yeah. So first, going back to my example of how the most common threat access vectors work through IT, making a stronger IT makes a stronger OT. You are indirectly building a stronger defensive posture, again, against the most common threat model. And so step one. Step two is my favorite joke in industrial control systems. I have other better jokes, so we're clear as people groan at this one. What is an industrial control system? How do I look at a computer and tell it's an industrial control system? Pause. Punchline. It's any computer that's at least 20 years old. Now you start to think as an IT person, right? Now the IT crowd's going like, what? Why is it 20 years old? Well, these things can be very expensive. These things are built for high availability and long life cycles. This is not your phone that you have been trained to switch out every 2 years, courtesy of Apple or Google or Samsung. These things are meant to stay and they're very expensive and they have to. There is no way to build good security immediately into an industry that has that kind of life cycle. So we have to start to look, well, what can we do around that? Furthermore, this is why less than 4% of industrial control system devices, again, right, they're what the stats mean, but a small percentage of industrial control system devices are able to be patched directly. Again, see earlier comment, that's why, right? This was built on a Windows CE operating system. I can't change the operating system. Windows CE is no longer supported. It's going to have vulnerabilities inherently. There's nothing you can do about that piece. So what can you do? This is what I've seen with all of the asset owners I've been working with for years. Everybody in the industry, roughly for about 10 years, is in one of two phases. One, visibility. Do I know what I have? And this goes to the maxim, I can only defend what I know I have. And it's not that you didn't know what you have, because those control engineers, those automation engineers, those safety engineers, the folks who are doing all of those engineers clearly knew the equipment that they've been working on for decades. It's not like they walked in and were like, oh, a corporate wants to know what's here. I guess I should figure that out. They know that stuff. They've been working that stuff. What they haven't been able to do is understand the cybersecurity risk that's now coming into it that's driving this question. And the question is, how does a centralized corporate organizational function have the visibility of those devices so that they can manage and inject the requirements for managing the cyber risk? So that has two problems. One, it's IT people coming into OT.
Yeah.
That does not work very well, very easily. That is something where the IT folks come in and are like, we need these things. And the OT folks are like, look, we're the reason that you exist. This is how the company makes money and this is our mission. And we've been doing just fine. Thank you very much. Why are you here? So there's a cultural piece, and you have to establish a win-win proposition for coming into that, other than just there's scary things that are going to happen. You need to do something. Not enough. That's establishing visibility. The second mistake that I see the IT folks making is they try to get everything. Well, For those of you who are not familiar, there's a nominal enterprise architecture framework called the Purdue model. And the Purdue model helps folks be able to understand the different layers from IT into those beachhead higher level industrial control systems, and then the conduits and connections between these shared services that are going to exist, say, at a manufacturing plant, and then the individual industrial control system segments and process flows down here. And so I don't need to know everything because, again, the threat is going to work north to south because most threats start outside in, supply chain notwithstanding. And my architecture also supports a north-south perspective. So approach it with a Pareto view of get enough visibility to get enough control to get started, which leads you to the second phase. And where I see these folks, again, going back to, I can't patch and directly mitigate most risks directly on an industrial control system like a 20-year-old programmable logic controller. But I can build a defensible architecture around it. And if I know what I have, now I can make a data-driven, informed decision that doesn't break the workflows, doesn't break the things that those engineers need to accomplish their jobs with the operational technology devices. I support that, and I'm establishing control around what the potential risks are.
Yeah. Well, I love that response because I think you anticipated a lot of the questions we would have gotten in terms of, all right, I'm on the OT side. How do I work with these IT guys and make this all work? Because they work in silos. They don't always like communicating with each other. But a lot of what you laid out there makes a lot of sense. So hopefully that can help.
Yeah. I mean, if you're an OT guy, patience, right? The IT people mean well. You are on the same team. I know it doesn't feel like it. You wear PPE. They don't. They wear khakis. You are on the same team. They are trying to help. So I would just say have a little forbearance, a little patience, sort of gently guide and coach and nudge them to where the right answers are in terms of how they should build relationships, how they're doing what they're doing. By all means, hold the line on the safety and availability of what you are delivering, but do not let them mess that up. I am not advocating that. But do help them get to the process, the relationships, the project management, those components that are going to advance the changes that you do need to have. It is going to happen at some point. Ransomware, sadly, comes for us all.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking a lot about the technology. We know OT's got challenges there, especially with all that legacy networking. The other part that we talked a lot about out at RSA was the human element of this and how that's a big part of what we have to tailor our defenses to as well. Maybe you can chime in a little bit there and just talk about some of your experiences in trying to negate some of those internal elements, your workforce, and the impact they can have on a lot of cyber defense initiatives as well.
Oh, that's tough. Jeff, I'm a little contrarian on this one. I'll use a common case study. Everybody at this point is subjected to phishing training. Everybody at this point roughly kind of knows what a phish is. And yet this keeps happening. It keeps working. So the case example I like to give to illustrate the relationship that I think is the best relationship is user clicks on phish burns your organization to the ground with ransomware. Is that the user's fault? I would argue no. They are using a computer and an email system the way it was designed. It was designed to have them get email. It was designed to have attachments. It was designed for them to open the attachments. Because the reality is, sure, there are absolutely the users that make you groan and roll your eyes and go, how do they work here? I didn't know there was somebody who was born in 500 BC. Like, do you not know what computers do? Sorry. They exist. They are a part of the human fabric in your organization. Accept it. Instead, I see that as incumbent on us as the security professionals to build systems around what they do. And that doesn't mean getting them carte blanche. This is not Bryson saying, here's a signed note like Ron Swanson, you can do whatever you want. What I am saying is we should categorize users not only in high-risk function, but also in high-risk behavior, and build controls around the fact that that's what they're going to be doing, that we accept that is the potential risk to those behaviors, and we mitigate it there as opposed to continuing to try to put it on the user. I feel like, Jeff, I'll ask you, right? When's the last time you enjoyed your annual HR training?
Probably never. I haven't. Right.
Yeah, nobody
Exactly.
has, right?
Yeah.
Compliance training is compliance training. And it doesn't matter if it's cybersecurity or it's HR or it's finance or pick the functions that we all have to mandatory do every year. It doesn't really move the needle because it isn't a part of what we are. It isn't actually baked into the life. It's something we have to put up with, check the box, and then I'm back to doing what I do. And that's the same thing for us as practitioners. If this wasn't our jobs, we would be having the same approach. We have bigger problems that we have to worry about than the probability of something possibly happening. I'm going to worry about the fact if I don't get this done by 5 o'clock on Friday, I get fired. That's a much more near thing. I'm going to worry about the fact that I don't have gas in my car and I can't get to my work in the morning, right? There are all of these mundane things of life and our profession that don't translate into everybody getting cyber risk, because the reality is cyber risk is not the primary concern for anybody. And you can see this reflected in public companies where cyber risk has grown in where they report it, but it is still no higher than number 3 and usually somewhere about number 5 on what any corporation would rank as the risks they have to deal with in conducting their operations. That all goes back to the humans, the users, the employees, and everybody that's doing all of these pieces.
Yeah. So, I mean, the fact that it's still not seen as the priority that maybe it should be in a lot of these organizations, is that cultural? Is that a cost thing? Is that a time thing? Is it a combination of all that stuff? I understand at the end of the day, we need to get widgets out the door in manufacturing. That's the end goal. But we're not going to be able to do that. I mean, ask Jaguar Land Rover, who just had to shut down for a month because they didn't prioritize cybersecurity. You know, what are you seeing as the bigger conflict there? Is it the stuff that we're usually dealing with, time and money, or is it just a cultural thing?
Yeah, you hurt me on that one. So I am a Jaguar Land Rover owner. I have reached out to my dealership a month ago to try to schedule a service, and they're just like,
right.
No can do. Everything's down. We can't get parts. We can't schedule appointments, and we don't know when we'll be back.
Yeah.
Enjoy your car. Well, at least my car kind of works. I guess I got that as a plus.
Right.
So there's 2 kinds of companies in the world. So this is a paraphrase from Dmitry Alperovich, who's the co-founder of CrowdStrike. And he famously said about 2018, those that have been hacked and know it, and those have been hacked and don't know it. Well, I came up with a derivative of that where there's 2 kinds of companies. Leadership cares about security. Leadership doesn't care about security. And I use that because it gets everyone's attention really fast. Like, well, hold on. Oh, that kind of matches my experience, because we're all trying to do the right thing. We're trying to make our organization safer and better. And yet it feels like we have to fight a whole lot to do that. Why is that? Going back to the understanding of that statement, it's not that your leadership doesn't care about security. Clearly, something that would have a catastrophic or high impact risk to your company is something they care about. The problem is the first thing they care about is compliance. Compliance is the existential foundation of business operations. If I'm in a regulated industry, I literally cannot operate without regulation. That is a risk that has 100% probability of happening. I don't have to worry about whether it'll happen or not. The regulator will come for me. And so that's the stepping point. That's the start. That's where every leader starts, is going, well, these are the requirements I have to do. Everything else is now bonus. So one, when you realize that that's what's driving your leadership, trying to get them directly to security isn't going to work. You have to start with where they are at compliance and start layering on security. So what is the difference between compliance and security? Compliance is a checklist. It's the only way that I can measure things at scale. Now, that might be a sophisticated checklist like ISO 20000, ISO 27000, ISA, IEC 62443 kind of guidance. But at the end of the day, those are all very clear things that look for evidence of process execution. It's checklist, right? I am not measuring the efficacy. I am measuring the completion of something. Security is a critical thinking process that I do on top of that. That's where I'm going. I've done the checklist. And by the way, your checklist is the adversary's checklist too. That's why everything works before it's deployed, because they already know your checklist. Your compliance is table stakes. Security is the critical thinking of going, all right, this thing has come out. And because we are a unique snowflake, because every company is its own compilation of people and tools and culture and all of this stuff, which is constantly changing, which is why nobody can say, if you do this, you're safe. There's no answer. There's no silver bullet, because it's contextual, which is why you need to apply critical thinking from your organizational's lens to get the security you need to do. So tying that back, that's the gap. That's where you have to approach leadership, and you have to recognize what their starting point is to growing them to where you need to do an additional investment.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that it makes a lot of sense, and I think establishing it from that perspective is also going to help you get buy-in further up. Even using the checklist dynamic, people can universally embrace that. We start getting in, that can help you lead into the strategic elements that you need to reinforce. Now, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
So
checklists let me do things at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bryson, we've danced around this a little bit, but maybe you can talk a little bit about what you do with SCYTHE, what the company is about, and in particular, really help us understand AEV a little bit and what that's all about.
Oh, Jeff, you only booked me for an hour for this. I didn't know this was going to be a 10-part documentary series.
Well, whatever we got to do, man.
Okay. So first of all, AEV, Adversarial Exposure Validation, which is the latest term that Gartner pulled out of a 2023 concept they released called the Continuous Threat Exposure Management Cycle, which is a 5-step process to how companies should scope, identify, validate, improve risk in what they do. And then all of those categories, from chasm to vulnerability management to previously what was called breach and attack simulation, all of these things now just fit into that process model. And I really like it because the process model is correct. It is a very clear, simple process model that any enterprise practitioner would follow. Now, the technologies that you choose to use in it, right, a la carte, you get to pick. So adversarial exposure validation is, I think, a pretty misunderstood part of the market. And part of that is, I'm going to throw some other companies under the bus, that they educated the market on their approach to breach and attack simulation, which was static, checklist-based, and turned MITRE ATT&CK into a bingo card. Guess what? Why are you surprised you didn't get security from doing a simple checklist, no matter how technical you thought it was? Doesn't work. So adversarial exposure validation is the idea that, how do we measure security? There is no quantifiable measure. And more interestingly, in this discipline of cybersecurity, there's no engineering measure of it. When I build a bridge, I know exactly what conditions I built the bridge to, how long, what it can do, and all of those, that fault tolerance. There is no equivalent in cybersecurity. There's none. I can't quantify it. And part of it goes back to a thread that you've been raising in this, which is the human element is a significant part of the surface area. So why am I surprised technical solutions and technical controls don't continue to actually move the needle on solving the problem, which is a human-centered problem with technology? So we want to measure security by the threat. At the end of the day, it's the only vote that counts. Your confidentiality, integrity, availability, resilience, all come back to what can somebody else that I don't know and is a thinking, acting entity, what can they get away with? That's it. So AEV is going, well, the best way to measure all of that is to actually do it. And this is where we get from the annual penetration test, which everybody's used to, this snapshot in time, to, well, now, how do I bring in a threat signal to properly look at my preventative and detective controls? Because those are the two primary control categories in an enterprise. What can I stop? What can I see and act on? And drive that signal to seeing what works and what doesn't. And one of the key things I want to point out is it's not binary. These tests are not binary. It's not like I did a 70-step emulation of Black Cat ransomware. It's looking at each of those steps against users and assets in that attack logic and understanding what worked, what didn't work, and at different levels, right? Because something got stopped in a test doesn't mean it would get stopped in the real world. You need to presume your prevention will fail. This is why assume breach is a mentality, because you will be breached. So my recommendation is focus on detection and response, which is where 99% of most defense should be focusing, because you can never stop the end, but you can catch them a lot quicker. And so with adversarial exposure validation, AEV, you're able to generate that signal frequently, often, at scale, in different ways for different purposes to get as good as possible at that. And that's why the quality, the fidelity of the test matters. I'm going to go back to what I said, MITRE ATT&CK is being used as a bingo card. The way I like to describe MITRE ATT&CK, because by the way, MITRE ATT&CK was one of the big game changers in this industry. When it became popular again around 2018, finally, we all agreed to a common taxonomy and a vocabulary how to describe an attack. That's great, particularly for all the uses, because the attacks are what define what we do. The problem was, like anything that's simple and great, it gets abused. I'm going to do that box, and I'm going to do tests in that box. Check. We're green in that box. High five, right? Let's do that. Well, do you really think a Chinese operator is in Beijing and a PLA 64468 is going, hey, I stole credentials. High five. We're good. Let's go home. No, they stole credentials because they are now that user at that asset in your enterprise, and they're going to use those credentials to advance what they're doing. I'm going to use that to escalate. I'm going to use that to get to that shared drive that I'm not supposed to have access to and get that information. I'm going to use that to take over that safety instrumented system that is how your plant operates safely. I'm going to do all those things with these escalated privileges. Well, why does that matter? Because the fidelity of what I'm actually doing, the commands I'm doing on a host, the network traffic that I generate are going to look different now. The things that I can do are going to look different now. And if I can't put those in order, then I'm not getting a good enough insight to be able to graduate from a checklist again to where real security thinking is happening. Yeah, so adversary exposure validation, SCYTHE is that's the tool that we've built. We have clients who run the tool to be able to train, to be able to validate controls with the threat intelligence, because at the end of the day, saying, hey, I have an ability to emulate an adversary, but where do I get the threat intelligence to tell me what's the best way to do that? That's also what we do, which helps the C-suite answer when there's the latest campaign that's sweeping an industry and setting it on fire. What would happen to us before it happens to us? That's the kind of pieces that the SCYTHE platform is used for. And we've had a lot of success in helping different kinds of critical infrastructure asset owners, because while we're not working at the low levels of operational technology, going back to the fact that there's a north-south component to this, those beachhead of Linux and Windows systems, the tool works really well there. So it's a really nice way to marry the way that the threat actually works through your enterprise, and at the same time, not getting yourself in trouble with crossing too far into the operational technology realm, where for reasons of safety and availability, they're not wanting you to do these tests. So we walk right up to that line with the tool.
Very good. No, it makes a ton of sense. And, speaking about some of the things that you do in addition to SCYTHE, and actually where we met at RSA, is the ICS Village. Now, you're able to get through that other response without the Ken Burns treatment. We don't need to put it into, 10 different parts or anything like that, or make a doc out of it. But maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the ICS Village, because I think there's a ton of benefit there for this audience as well.
Yeah, so the ICS Village is a nonprofit. We're an official 501c3 charity, co-founded with Tom Van Norman. So he and I run the nonprofit. Our mission is education and awareness around critical infrastructure security. So that's why Jeff saw us at RSA. We have been a perennial mainstay at the RSA conference for 10 years, helping folks get past what is an industrial control system? Oh, that's a PLC, programmable logic controller. Conveniently, we do actually have the PLC that was used in the Stuxnet attack to help make it a little more real. Wow. For some of our exhibits. We also are a large part of the villages, our village at DEF CON. That's probably our World Series. That's 3 days of a lot of talks, demonstrations, capture the flag so that folks can get hands-on industrial control systems. We collaborated with the Office of the National Cybersecurity Director out of the White House back in 2023. And part of what we helped push was the pillar on workforce development. And so for the last 2 years, with a generous grant from the Ron and Cindy Gula Foundation, private philanthropy, we've been building out workforce development training for industrial control systems, with the idea being that, can we build training that allows somebody who does not have a degree, potentially is not even technical in this space, come on the other side of that training and be able to get a trade or apprentice level job at one of the manufacturers or one of the asset owners, where they can continue their on-the-job training, but they are able to get that better job and getting them started And all of us benefit from the fact that we're increasing the workforce because we have a shortage in this space.
No, huge issue in addressing the resource issue that we have, not just in manufacturing, but throughout a number of sectors when it comes to cybersecurity. Really like a lot of the work that's being done with the ICS Village. It's some good stuff. Definitely check it out.
Yeah, one other thing on the ICS Village. We also have our own annual conference.
Okay.
It was previously called Hack the Capital. This year we changed it to Critical Effect. It's usually in the late spring timeframe in Washington, D.C. There is a virtual option to attend, but I think that one's really interesting because it meets a niche where we're engaging members of Congress, their staffers, on top of the usual in industry and academia, to directly talk about the policy challenges that are doing this. And the reason that we do that is, with all the other work we're doing, there's a lot of technical outreach from those who don't know anything to IT folks understanding they're in an OT environment. Where do you think their water and electricity comes from? To helping onboard those who are interested in becoming OT security practitioners. But the chessboard that we play on is policy and regulation and funded at that level. And so having that insight, building those relationships and understanding what's happening there helps you understand the extent of what's possible in our society with what you do.
Yeah. No, good stuff. We'll definitely put a link to it in the episode description. Check out ICS Village without a doubt, as well as the upcoming event here in the spring. Another thing I wanted to touch on, Bryson, this came up in our conversation out in San Francisco and was highlighted a little bit more and doing a little research. You've got a pretty good background in the military. There's been some time you spent in the Army, and I'm always curious when we talk to cybersecurity professionals and those that have taken some of those things that they learned in the military and now applying it to what they're doing now in this field. I'd be kind of curious to get your take in terms of coming from the Army, going into cybersecurity. What have been some of the correlations or some of the things that you've taken from one and transferred to the other? Or was there some sort of connective tissue between the two, I guess?
Sure. So I was an Army officer. Where I really got into cybersecurity was actually in the intelligence community. And I think it's really interesting how much cybersecurity in the civilian world has been militarized. I think one of the reasons for that is that a lot of the terminology flows from the way that the military already did exercises, did assessments, conducted operations. And so it was a really nice, easy fit. The second part is going back to workforce. The U.S. military and the intelligence community have been a fount of trained folks coming into the civilian sector after their time. And they get a lot of training. And the other thing that they get is you get to see the art of the possible. I think that gets thrown around a lot, but my time in the intelligence community, I saw the very edges of what could be done with computers and networks because that was our job. That was the level that we had to go to accomplish the mission. You don't really see that on average in the commercial world. So that's the way the threat works and thinks. And having that insight, that knowledge, and that exposure helps the civilian world understand those risk models as well. So I think those are the two things that I really took away from my government time.
Yeah, and absolutely. You touch on all of these skilled individuals who can come out of the military and help your organization. It's something we've heard repeated on the show many times. So if you are struggling to fill in some of those cybersecurity roles, it's a great resource to look up and take advantage of it. Absolutely. One of the things too, Bryson, this has been awesome. We've touched on a lot of different topics here. I'd like to get your feeling just in looking ahead here. What are some of the bigger trends that we should be aware of? Things that you see that might be lighting up your radar a little bit down the line here.
Oh boy. Well, there's going to be more ransomware.
Yeah.
More. Your supply chain is going to increasingly be targeted. We still, was it 4 years later, do not know where all the instances of Log4j are. Remember that? Remember that one? That was everybody stop everything and the whole world's on fire. We still don't know where it all is. That same problem still exists 4 years later. And that's assuming you are completely up to speed with the state of the art in it, which most folks aren't. So your supply chain is the invisible in. Your trusted suppliers, your trusted vendors, your trusted customers, those relationships, particularly in an operational technology environment. Usually one of the ways that I get the IT folks' eyes to pop out is telling them, the reality is vendors, contractors have mandatory access into your OT environment already. remote or physical, either way, it is contractually mandated. They will get into your stuff for lots of different reasons. And they just kind of go like, wait, what? And then I point out, well, what do you think Microsoft's doing with all the cloud stuff? I mean, where do you think the data from Copilot is going, right? I mean, yeah, they built it with a privacy model for your organization, but does that include Microsoft knowing that stuff, right? I mean, and I'm not picking on Microsoft, but just recognize all of the invisible ways that you have third parties that are in your environment that you haven't considered. Your supply chain is a target and will increasingly be targeted because it's easy and it works. And they've learned that it is not expensive to do this at scale. When I get a SolarWinds, I get 30,000 targets with one op. When I get Kaseya, I get that one-to-end scale. So all of these tools, software and or hardware, are targets from that perspective and are going to continually be attacked. The other one, which we're experiencing here in the United States, that I've been summarizing for this year, I did an interview with Dr. Paul Rosenzweig on my show, Unicorn Dispatch Live, a couple of months ago. And the new Trump administration, what they've done and what they're doing, because people complain about Doge and they complain about what's happening to CISA, and CISA is a fraction of itself. The administration is not looking at these things individually going, is this a good project to do this way or that way? What they've done is say, we're going from Fed to state, period, across the board. Cybersecurity nerds, you're no different. State level now, figure it out. And unfortunately, there hasn't been plan and guidance to that, but that's the reality. And so looking at it, it is incumbent on the states to step up and do these things. So I just did a Hack the Plant podcast through the ICS Village with Colin Ahern from New York and Kirk Harith from Ohio. They are both, as far as we know, the only two politically appointed cyber at that level, not CISO, but cyber advisors to state government. Colin is Democrat in New York. Kirk is Republican in Ohio. And they're all seeing that this is where they need to go. But think about what that means. First, you need to get the funding. Well, legislatures take time to get that funding. Then the funding needs to be dispersed. Then you need to actually start building an organization with qualified people to get what we call in the military initial operating capability, IOC. So I now have a functional organization that is able to do the basics of the mission that I tasked it with. Well, how long does that take? And some states are really ahead of the game. Cyber Florida is an example of a state program here in Florida that has been advancing this. Utah has also been pretty advanced, and we've seen other specific pieces, but nobody has built a systemic level equivalent to like what we had from CISA at the federal level, now at the state level. That needs to happen. And that is going to be really interesting to see how far we get in 2026.
No, I agree with you 100%, especially when you look at CISA was very heavily involved in establishing a lot of the secure by design principles and guiding specifications that we have right now. Somebody needs to pick the ball up there because I felt like we were really making some ground and it's sort of stopped. There's definitely a pause there that needs to be picked up and continued to move forward with just to help out the industrial community.
And you have a regulatory and policy risk to that because having states have a different framework and fabric of approaching to something like secure by design makes it expensive and more difficult to meet each of those requirements.
No, great point. So, Bryson, this is one I like to throw at folks, where you're seeing what the bad guys are up to. You see a lot of the weaknesses that we have inherently right now to overcome. With all of these different challenges that you're dealing with on a daily basis, what at the end of the day gives you some peace of mind? What helps you get to sleep at night, even though you're very aware of all the challenges, shall we call them, that are out there right now for cybersecurity?
Yeah, that's the proverbial lesson I've learned speaking on behalf of cybersecurity publicly for a decade is you're the wet blanket. Hey, it's security. Everything fails. Everything's on fire. Thanks for my talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, what? So why have we not seen explicit catastrophic impact on critical infrastructure from all of the activities that we publicly know, at least since 2010, have been done by the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians on US critical infrastructure? And this gets into Professor Jay Healy at Columbia, who runs the policy department there. he has a really good framework for the levels of nation support, right? How far down are these different hacking organizations supported? And the reality is there is a deterrence. Deterrence has the point not necessarily being binary, right? We're not preventing people from doing these attacks clearly, but they are clearly holding back on an impact they could have. Why? Well, US military. If you cyber us, we're not going to cyber you back. We're going to bomb you. And no, that's right. We're going to have war. The red line is going to be crossed. And nobody wants to take on the US military head on, which is why you have all of these side asymmetric things that you approach and poke the bear of the US with, because nobody wants to face down the barrel of an M1 Abrams. I was a tank commander, so I really love tanks. They're great. So there is a whole society effort that is currently working to keep a lid on this. How long is that going to last is the question. But the good news is we have gotten ourselves to some level into the calculus of our enemies and what they're willing to do. There are a lot of great people and a lot of great organizations doing a lot of great work. Clearly, we just talked about my teams and what we're doing with all of our wonderful volunteers and different folks. But we're not the only ones. There's a lot of folks doing a lot of awesome things. And security, by definition, is never going to be 100%. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to meet all the things in advance because the threat is incentivized to surprise. But it's getting better. The attention is there. The things that our attackers do educate us on what we can do, as well as the folks who are not in security on what's happening and what we're going to do. Back to that talk with Chris Krebs in 2020 about ransomware. Well, guess what? Courtesy of Colonial Pipeline, your grandmother knows what ransomware is. Now, Grandma Reinke, how do you pronounce your last name?
Yep, you got it.
Okay. Grandma Reinke may not understand the technical details of ransomware, but she knows what it is. She knows it's a thing. So we have the education and awareness that's been increasing. And I think with that, we're going to start to find imaginative solutions that layer on top of what we already have to really advance what we need to do.
Yeah. No, good stuff, Bryson. Thanks again so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Folks want to learn a little bit more about you and the work you're doing. You can check them out at SCYTHE.io as well as icsvillage.com. All right. Awesome. Thanks so much, Bryson. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@IEN.com. For Bryson Bort, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.